The air in the hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and desperation. Nurses bustled past without seeing the people they stepped around. The walls were lined with cracked vinyl chairs occupied by blank stares and silent prayers. Somewhere near the vending machine, a girl no older than 12 moved like a shadow, careful, fast, unnoticed. But she made a mistake. She picked the wrong man. Caleb Monroe felt the light tug before he even turned around. Years of boardroom battles and backroom deals had made him keenly aware of every movement around him. He looked down and caught her not by the wrist, not with force, but with his eyes. She froze hand halfway out of his coat pocket, clenching his black leather wallet like it was oxygen. Her face was thin, too thin. The oversized hoodie couldn't hide how small her frame was, how hungry her eyes looked. But what startled Caleb more than her presence was her voice when she spoke. "Please, sir, just this once." Her voice cracked at the edges like glass under pressure. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, already bracing for the yelling, the shouting, the call for security. Instead, she found silence. Not soft silence, stern silence. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't snatch his wallet back. He just looked at her for a long moment before asking without a trace of sarcasm, "How much do you need?" The question didn't register at first. She blinked, uncertain. Maybe she misheard. She was expecting a threat, maybe a shove, definitely a lecture. But this man, clearly wealthy from the watch on his wrist to the cut of his coat, was just standing there, talking to her. Her fingers loosened on the wallet, but she didn't let go. I didn't mean to steal," she whispered, eyes glistening now. "I wasn't going to hurt you or anything. It's just my mom's in there. Room 317. They said if I don't pay $700 today, they'll transfer her to County General. And she's barely breathing. She doesn't even know I left the room?" Caleb stayed quiet, then slowly reached into his inside pocket, not to call security, but to take out his phone. She flinched. He noticed. "What's her name?" he asked. The girl hesitated, confused. "Maria Carter." He tapped the name into his notes. He had seen this girl before, weeks ago, in fact, sleeping on chairs, pressing her face against ICU windows, trying to talk to doctors who walked right past her. She was always around, yet always ignored like furniture, like a stain the staff were too polite to mention. Why aren't you calling the police?" she asked quietly. Caleb glanced at her again, and this time the smile that touched his lips was bitter. "Because Lena Carter," he said, using her full name like he'd known it all along, "I've got a feeling you're not just some random kid trying to steal a wallet." She went rigid. How did he know her name? Who was this man? The truth was, Caleb had spent enough time in these halls to recognize the signs, the slouched posture of a kid trying to be invisible, the instinct to sleep near power outlets so phones could charge the worn-down shoes that meant they'd walk there and had nowhere to go. He knew them because he used to see those signs in someone else. In his wife Elena, during her last few weeks alive, when the hospital slowly stopped trying to save her and quietly started billing him to death. He put his wallet away. "Let's make a deal," he said. Lena blinked, uncertain again. "I'll pay for whatever your mom needs. In return, you come with me. We'll go to her room together, and you tell me exactly what the doctors have said to you over the last few weeks." She narrowed her eyes. "Why would you do that?" He crouched slightly, not to intimidate her, but to be at her level. "Because I think your mother may be caught in the same trap that killed my wife. And if I'm right, then I've just found the key to blowing this whole place wide open." For a moment, neither of them moved. Around them, the hospital kept moving. Pages echoed overhead. Machines beeped. Someone cried in a nearby room. But there in that sterile corridor, something changed. A girl who had come to steal walked side by side with a man who had come to forget. And together, without even realizing it, they were about to start a war. They walked in silence at first, past vending machines, past silent glances from nurses who didn't dare ask questions. Lena stayed half a step behind Caleb, her eyes darting nervously between his back and the floor tiles. She wasn't sure if this was still some kind of trap. Grown-ups didn't just help, especially not rich ones, especially not ones who knew your name before you told them. Room 317 looked like something out of a medical horror story. Her mother Maria lay almost unrecognizable face, pale lips cracked, surrounded by wires and beeping machines that filled the room with artificial life. Lena's shoulders sank at the sight, the small flame of hope she carried, flickering under the weight of tubes and blinking lights. She stepped to her mother's side, brushed a hand against her arm, whispered something only they could understand. Caleb stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. He'd been in a room just like this before, 2 years ago. Room 424. Different hospital, same machinery, same smell of bleach and quiet death. His wife Elena had walked in with a headache and never walked out. Her chart had been filled with words like complications and experimental, and when he finally asked the hard questions, it was too late. A voice behind them broke the silence. Mr. Monroe. What a surprise. They turned. A tall man in a pristine white coat stood at the threshold, his smile tight, practiced. His name tag read Dr. Gregory Vance, but he didn't need an introduction. Caleb had seen his face in documents, medical reports, financial records, all the quiet corners where corruption hides. And this Vance added, looking at Lena like she was an unpaid bill, must be the little issue we've been hearing about. Lena stiffened her hand, still holding her mother's. Caleb stepped forward. Doctor, he said, nodding politely. I was just explaining to Lena how concerned I am about the rising costs associated with Maria's treatment. Vance gave a dry chuckle. Well, quality care does come at a price, especially for patients whose conditions tend to evolve. These things can't always be predicted. Lena turned, then anger flickering through her tears. My mom came in with a cough. You said it was just a minor infection. Now it's pneumonia, then sepsis, and now some kind of surgery. Vance raised an eyebrow. Young lady, I suggest you leave the medicine to the professionals. Your role is to support your mother and find a way to meet the financial requirements. In the corner, a nurse holding a tablet shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the floor. Caleb noticed. He noticed everything. The subtle body language. The words Vance chose. The arrogance in every sentence. It was exactly the same script he'd been handed 2 years ago. The difference now was he was ready. He turned to Lena, gently placing a card in her hand. Why don't you grab a coffee downstairs, he said softly. Take a break. Use this. She looked at the card, black metallic, no limit. Her eyes widened. Are you sure? Caleb nodded. I'll stay with your mom. As she left, Vance's tone changed, as Caleb knew it would. Listen, Monroe, he said, stepping closer, voice dropping. Whatever guilt you're carrying, don't turn it into a crusade. This girl and her mother, they're not your responsibility. Funny, Caleb replied, pulling his phone from his coat. That's exactly what my wife said about you 2 years ago. Vance blinked, faltered, but not for long. Ah, yes, the late Mrs. Monroe. Tragic case. But complications are part of the process. You should be over it by now. I am, Caleb said flatly, pressing record on his phone behind his back. That's why I've got the time and money now. To make sure no one else ends up like her. He smiled, but his eyes were cold as stone. In that moment, he knew Vance thought he was winning. That he saw Caleb as another grieving widower, throwing money at a wound that never healed. But Vance didn't know he was already walking into a trap carefully built with silence, patience, and now, one stolen wallet and a little girl brave enough to speak up. Caleb waited until Vance left the room, his steps echoing with confidence he hadn't earned. The door clicked shut behind him, and the soft beeping of machines filled the quiet once more. Maria remained still, her breath shallow beneath the layers of tubes and wires. Caleb stepped closer, studying the chart at the foot of her bed. Half the procedures listed didn't match the symptoms Lena had described. It was all too familiar, unnecessary tests, long hospital stays, vague language in the charts that justified everything and explained nothing. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through a contact list labeled Only Morris. Dr. Dana Morris answered on the second ring. Did you find her? She asked without greeting. Yes, Caleb said. And you were right. It's happening again. Dana's voice was quiet, tight with rage. Come by the cafe on Fairmont. Back corner booth. Bring whatever you've got. 15 minutes later, Caleb stepped into a quiet coffee shop with more empty chairs than customers. Dana was already there, her hair pulled back a folder in front of her untouched coffee to her right. She'd once been St. Andrew's top pediatrician until she started asking questions. Now she was the whistleblower no one wanted to hire. She slid the folder across the table. That's just a glimpse, she said. Admissions with similar patterns. Low-income patients. Minor illnesses that suddenly spiral. Insurance claims padded with fake treatments. Caleb opened it. Dozens of names, charts, billing records, signatures he recognized Vance's mostly, but others too. One page caught his eye, a 12-year-old girl. Diagnosis migraines. Treated for nearly 2 months. Final cost $67,000. Outcome deceased. Dana watched his expression change. "That was my daughter," she said softly. Caleb closed the folder. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she replied. "Just make sure he doesn't do it again." That night, Caleb returned to the hospital. Lena was in the hallway outside her mother's room, scribbling in a small spiral notebook. She looked up as he approached, cautious at first, then curious. "What are you writing?" he asked. She hesitated. "Just things I notice." The nurse with red hair, she always carries a blue folder after talking to Dr. Vance. She never goes back to the same room twice. Caleb smiled, a flicker of admiration passing over his face. "You're watching them. They think I'm just some kid," she said, shrugging. "I figured if no one's listening to me, I might as well pay attention." He sat beside her on the bench, nodding slowly. "There's a room on the 3rd floor. Room 3C. I saw 3 men in suits go in today. No badges, not doctors. Vance met them there at 3 o'clock. Caleb's eyebrows lifted. She was connecting dots faster than he expected. "You saw that too?" Lena nodded. "They meet every Tuesday. Always at 3. And there's always a nurse waiting outside with a clipboard." Caleb leaned back, his mind racing. She wasn't just observant, she was critical to this. The kind of witness no camera could replace. The kind who noticed what adults overlooked. "You're not just helping your mom," he said quietly. "You're helping every family in this hospital." Lena looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just want her to come home." Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but steady. "We'll make sure she does." From the far end of the hallway, Dr. Vance appeared again, smiling, sharp-suited, and walking with that same polished arrogance. He noticed Caleb and Lena sitting together and frowned. His pace quickened. Caleb stood up. "Remember what you told me," he whispered. "Every detail matters now." As Vance approached, the battle lines drew themselves in silence. What had started with a trembling hand and a stolen wallet was quickly becoming something much bigger. And Caleb knew he wasn't just exposing a corrupt doctor. He was building a case against an entire system. Vance stopped just a few feet away. His expression tightened, but the smile stayed plastered to his face like a cheap mask. "Mr. Monroe," he said with forced warmth, "I thought we had an understanding." Caleb remained calm. "We do. I'm paying for Mrs. Carter's care, remember? That gives me every right to be involved." Vance's smile thinned. "Your presence here is beginning to raise questions. People talk. And frankly, the girl's constant wandering is becoming distracting." Caleb didn't move. "She's concerned about her mother. Any decent person would be." "Decent people," Vance said, his voice dropping, "don't insert themselves into things they don't understand." But Caleb wasn't listening anymore. He was watching Vance carefully, like he had been trained to do. He saw the twitch in his jaw, the shift in his weight, the controlled frustration behind his eyes. This wasn't just a man annoyed. This was a man who was used to control, who didn't like when the narrative started slipping from his grip. "Tell me something, Doctor," Caleb said casually. "What exactly is room 3C used for?" Vance blinked just for a second, but it was enough. "That's a supply meeting area. Not your concern." Lena from the bench behind them didn't say a word, but Caleb felt her attention sharpen. She was learning, watching how the game was played. "I see," Caleb nodded. "And those 3 men in suits that visit every Tuesday at 3, Vance's nostrils flared. "You're out of line." "I'm just paying attention," Caleb replied smoothly. For a moment, the hallway held its breath. Then Vance leaned in, his voice low and sharp. "You're playing a dangerous game, Monroe. And let me remind you, this isn't your fight." Caleb smiled, calm as ever. "That's where you're wrong. It became mine the day you let my wife die." The words dropped like a stone. Vance didn't respond. He turned and walked away, his shoes clicking furiously on the tile floor. That night in a quiet office Donna now used as her base of operations, Caleb sat beside her with Lena curled up in the corner, half listening as she pretended to read. Dana slid a USB drive across the table. Here's what we pulled from internal record surgery schedules, billing cycles, physician overrides. Vance's signature is on nearly all of them. Caleb took it, staring at the small plastic object that now held evidence worth millions. How deep does it go? Dana exhaled. He's not alone. There are nurses in on it, admins, insurance reps. They've turned human suffering into a business model, delay discharge, over-medicate, upcode everything. When families run out of money, they push them to the public system and call it charity. And no one stops them, Caleb asked, because people are scared, or tired, or too broken to fight back. Lena finally spoke, her voice small. What if they knew they weren't alone? Dana looked at her surprised. What do you mean? If other families knew someone was listening, she said, lifting her eyes, they might speak up too. They just need to believe someone's on their side. A silence followed, heavy and true. Caleb sat back, rubbing his jaw. She's right. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek black device, barely the size of a pen. I've been recording every conversation I've had with Vance. Dana raised her brows. You've already started. I started 2 years ago, he said. But now I have a witness. I have a paper trail. And thanks to Lena, I have patterns. Outside the office window, the hospital stood in sterile silence. But inside, something was shifting. For the first time in years, the system wasn't just watching the vulnerable were watching back. Morning came with an eerie stillness. The hospital parking lot, usually a churn of honking cars and impatient patients, felt different. Cameras stood on tripods. Reporters leaned into microphones with urgent whispers. Caleb arrived just before sunrise, stepping from his car with a calm so practiced it looked like confidence. But inside, his pulse thudded like a drum. This was the day. Lena stood beside him, wearing her best clothes, still second-hand, but clean-pressed and proudly her own. She clutched a tablet, its screen glowing with thumbnails of recorded conversations. One in particular had been played again and again, Vance's voice low and smug, saying, "Families like this are perfect. Desperate enough to believe anything. Too poor to fight back." "Are you ready?" Caleb asked. Lena nodded without looking up. He has no idea what's coming. Inside the hospital, Vance was halfway through his second espresso when a nurse burst into his office, pale and shaking. There's media outside," she stammered. "News Channel 7. They say they're here for a live report." Vance set down his cup. What report? She didn't answer, just turned and fled. He stormed toward the entrance, only to stop cold. Standing in the lobby were not just reporters, but families, dozens of them. Some held medical records, others carried framed photographs. All of them stared at him with something more powerful than outraged memory. A voice called out from the back, "Do you remember my daughter, Kesha?" A black woman stepped forward, holding up a photo. "You said she needed emergency brain surgery for a concussion. She's been in a coma for 6 months. Another voice followed, deeper, furious. "My father came in with diabetes. You gave him kidney failure." Caleb stepped into view beside the lead reporter, Sarah Mitchell, who held a manila folder fat with evidence. "Dr. Vance," she began, "can you comment on allegations of insurance fraud, falsified treatments, and targeted exploitation of low-income patients?" Vance's composure faltered. I have no idea what you're talking about." Mitchell held up the folder. "We have documentation from over 40 cases across the last 2 years, all traced to your direct supervision." Then she pointed to Lena, who raised the tablet and pressed play. Vance's voice filled the room, echoing off sterile walls. Caleb watched him closely. The shift in Vance was immediate, eyes wide, shoulders tight, that controlled arrogance, unraveling in real time. He turned to retreat through the side corridor, but 2 federal agents stepped in. "Dr. Gregory Vance," one said, presenting her badge. "You are under arrest for medical fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and negligent homicide." The cuffs clicked closed around his wrists. Gasps followed. Some staff looked away. Others stared, stunned, silent. Caleb stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Vance met his eyes. "You don't know who you're messing with. I have lawyers. I have connections." Caleb's voice was steady. "Your connections were arrested this morning. Insurance reps, administrators, even your chief billing officer. We've got recordings, emails, contracts. And thanks to one 12-year-old girl, we've got everything we need to prove intent." Dana stepped up beside him, holding another tablet. including last Tuesday's meeting, the one where you called patient care inventory management. Vance turned ashen. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Behind them, the families began to clap. Not loud, not joyous, but slow, solemn, as if finally allowed to exhale after years of being unheard. Caleb looked over at Lena. Her shoulders were straight, her chin lifted. No longer a girl who slept in waiting rooms. Just then a nurse emerged from the ICU with a discharge form in her hand. "Mr. Monroe," she asked. "Mrs. Carter's clear. She's going home today." Lena gasped. For the first time in weeks, her face cracked into a real smile. And for the first time in years, so did Caleb. The news broke across every major outlet by nightfall. "Doctor arrested in massive hospital fraud scheme," the headlines screamed. But to the families standing in that hospital lobby, it wasn't just a scandal, it was vindication. 3 days later, Caleb sat across from Dana Morris in the same quiet cafe where everything had started. Between them lay new stacks of documents, wider, deeper, darker than anything they'd expected. "He wasn't working alone," Dana said grimly, flipping through a folder. "We found connections to 3 other hospitals, same billing patterns, same treatment delays, even the same drug suppliers." Caleb took it in without blinking. This wasn't a doctor who went rogue. This was a system designed to profit from pain. Dana nodded. And the worst part, it almost worked. Again. At that moment, Lena stepped into the cafe, holding 2 large envelopes. Her energy had changed. She still wore secondhand clothes, but she walked differently now, upright, purposeful, like someone who knew her voice mattered. "These came for you," she said, handing one to Caleb and one to Dana. Inside Caleb's envelope was the official sentencing summary. Gregory Vance, 25 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. His medical license had been permanently revoked. Every asset he owned had been seized to repay victims through a newly established restitution fund. Caleb exhaled. "It's done." Lena looked down at her hands. "I didn't think it would ever feel real." Dana touched her arm gently. "It's real because of you." But Caleb knew the story wasn't over. Not really. That same afternoon, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. When he answered, there was silence on the other end, then a hoarse, familiar voice. Monroe. He didn't need a name. He recognized it instantly, Vance calling from prison. "I wanted to say, maybe you were right," the man rasped. "Maybe I lost sight. There were pressures, targets, the board expected numbers." Caleb didn't interrupt. He let the words spill, let the man ramble about systems and expectations and how it got away from me. When he finally paused, Caleb spoke, voice low and steady. "I didn't bring you down for personal revenge. I brought you down so no other family would have to go through what Lena's did. What Elena did. What my wife died believing was her fault." Vance didn't reply. The line went quiet and then it disconnected. Caleb stared at the phone for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. Outside in the garden beside the foundation's new office, Sarah Carter, now recovered, and working as part of the team, was helping a young couple fill out a medical review form. Lena was nearby, crouched beside a little boy who'd scraped his knee, carefully pressing a bandage to the wound. Watching her, Caleb was struck by the image, not of a survivor, but of a protector. She moved with the same quiet strength Elena used to carry in her final days. Not loud, not showy, just present, grounded, compassionate. Donna walked up beside him. "You know what impresses me most?" she asked. "What's that? He still thinks he was the victim," she said, half laughing. "Vance. He never once admitted what he did was wrong." "Not really." Caleb nodded. "Some people never will. But that's not who we're doing this for." In the weeks that followed, the Elena Monroe Foundation became more than just a name. It became a force. Requests poured in from across the country, families who'd read the story, who'd seen the broadcast, who realized that what happened to them wasn't bad luck, it was betrayal. And slowly the tide began to turn. Doctors were questioned. Billing practices revised. Transparency demanded. Families who once whispered in fear now spoke aloud, with documents, with records, with courage. It hadn't been just about one doctor. It never was. It was about making sure the system remembered who it was supposed to serve. 6 months later, the office of the Elena Monroe Foundation felt more like a community center than a nonprofit. Phones rang, emails poured in, and letters from across the country lined the bulletin board. The hum of determined voices filled the air. Mothers, fathers, nurses, students, all part of something bigger than they ever imagined. Caleb sat at his desk, not behind it but beside it, helping a young couple sort through insurance paperwork. Sarah Carter walked past carrying a tray of coffee and forms, already laughing at something a volunteer said behind her. Her health was strong again. The fatigue in her eyes had faded. In its place was focused purpose and quiet gratitude. Lena entered the room like she belonged there because she did. In a collared shirt and jeans, her backpack slung across one shoulder, she looked every bit the youth advocate she had become. She still had that little notebook in her bag. She still noticed things most people missed. "Mr. Caleb," she said, handing him an envelope. "It came today. From the court." He opened it slowly. Inside was a final ruling. Gregory Vance's sentence upheld, all appeals denied. The court had ruled that not only had he acted knowingly and maliciously, but that his operation had systematically preyed upon vulnerable populations for profit under the guise of care. His license was permanently stripped, his name removed from all hospital records, his mansion auctioned. His wife had filed for divorce on live television. His children, two of them now adults, had publicly changed their last names. And in prison, he now depended on the very public healthcare system he'd once mocked. Caleb read the ruling silently, then passed it to Lena. She scanned it with careful eyes. "He really lost everything, didn't he?" she said softly. Caleb looked out the window. In the garden, a group of children was playing near the hedges. One of them fell, scraping his elbow. Without hesitation, Lena got up, grabbed a small first aid pouch from the shelf, and jogged outside. He watched her kneel beside the boy, calm and warm, checking his arm, cleaning the wound, talking gently like it was the most important thing in the world. Just like Elena used to do. Dana walked in and saw him watching. "She's a natural," she said. Caleb nodded. She turned 12 and saved her mother. Turned 13 and started saving others. Dana smiled. "And she's just getting started." What impressed Caleb most wasn't the media attention or the foundation's growing reach, it was the ripple effect. Parents now asked questions. Patients demanded to see charts. Communities organized workshops about medical literacy. People no longer accepted "trust us" as an answer. Because of Lena. Because of what started in a hallway with a stolen wallet and a broken girl who refused to give up. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the room, Caleb stood and walked out to the garden. Lena looked up and smiled. The little boy waved his bandaged arm proudly like a badge of honor. "Busy day?" Caleb asked. Lena shrugged. "Always." He smiled. "I like that." They stood together in quiet for a while. The branches above them rustled in the late summer breeze. "You know," he said, "people always think revenge means tearing someone down." Lena looked up at him, curious. "But sometimes," he continued, "the best revenge is building something better. Something they could never destroy, no matter how hard they tried." She didn't say anything, just nodded and looked back at the children playing safe, loud, alive. And somewhere Caleb felt Elena's spirit settle. Not in the courtroom, not in Vance's cell, but right here in this garden, in this girl, in this work. He had lost a wife, but he had gained a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, a family. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching and being part of this journey.